All right, everyone. So now what we're going to do is actually get into the expert strategies for the SAT essay. So this is what's going to help you absolutely ace the SAT essay. So the very first one is called skip the directions. So as you can imagine by its name, it means that you don't need to read the SAT essay instructions when they're given. The reason you don't have to read them is because you're already going to know them. And how are you already going to know them? Well, they're listed right here. So I've copied these SAT essay instructions below because what we want to do is go through it and understand it now so that we don't have to ever read it again on test day. On test day, all you're going to have to read is the source text. And by skipping reading and having to understand the directions, you've already saved yourself 2 minutes of time that other students would take reading the directions. So just go ahead and skip the directions. So let's go through them here and understand what the SAT essay entails. So this is the prompt. It says, as you read the passage below, consider how the author uses evidence. So the reason author is in parentheses there is because it would most likely be the author's name there. Consider how, Sean Patel uses evidence, such as facts or examples to support claims, reasoning to develop ideas and to connect claims and evidence, stylistic or persuasive elements such as word choice or appeals to emotion to add power to the ideas expressed. So we're looking basically at the facts he's using or the examples the author's using, some reasoning that they're using, and some stylistic and persuasive elements. So we're really analyzing what the not only what the author is writing about, but how he's writing it to build his argument, right? So the how is very important here. Then they're going to put the source text, so they're going to copy and paste whatever text they decide to use for that particular SAT essay day. And then below that text, they're going to have the following. Write an essay in which you explain how the author builds an argument to persuade his or her audience that the author's claim. So that sentence is pretty much telling you the crux of what you need to know. Your essay needs to be about how the author builds the argument in order to persuade their audience. So again, it's all about the author trying to persuade the reader of whatever they're trying to claim or whatever their thesis is. So that's what every single text is going to be. It's going to be the author trying to prove something, right? So in your essay, analyze how the author uses one or more features listed above or features of your own choice. So the features they're talking about are the ones listed above. The facts or examples to support claim, reasoning to connect claims, evidence, stylistic, persuasive elements, word choice, appeals to emotion, those types of things, right? So you can choose any of those features or even choose new ones. And how is he using those things to strengthen strengthen the logic and persuasiveness of his or her argument? Be sure that your analysis focuses on the most relevant aspects of the passage. Okay, pretty self-explanatory there. Your essay should not explain whether you agree with the author's claims, but rather explain how the author builds an argument to persuade his or her audience. So I think they put this last sentence in there explicitly, especially for students who are used to the 2400 version of the SAT essay. In that essay that you would always be putting, whether you agree or disagree with the author's claim, or not necessarily an author's claim, but whether you agree or disagree with some statement. And they're saying don't do that at all. So they really tried to flip the script here on what the SAT essay is all about, but that's okay because we're flipping a lot of our strategies to make it even easier to approach this SAT essay. Okay, so now that you know what the directions are, you never need to read them again. To sum it up, basically your essay needs to explain how the author builds their argument. That's what it is, right? And so that's what you need to focus on. All right. Next is to exploit vocabulary. So vocab is super, super important on the SAT essay. And it's super important to use big vocabulary words And what I mean by big is, like scholarly or intellectual or something you wouldn't just use in everyday language. Um, and I know that sounds like an English teacher's worst nightmare, because they say, get your ideas across as simply as possible. But on the SAT essay, um, you really need to show the reader that you know what you're talking about, or yeah, that you know what you're talking about and that you're a smart student, right? So there's this thing that I read once. It said that it takes 7 seconds for someone to make a first impression about you. So just within 7 seconds of meeting someone new, that's how long it takes for them to make an impression about who you are. So I think the same is true for the SAT essay. It's going to take the reader about 7 seconds to make an impression about your essay. So within 7 seconds of reading your essay, they're going to know, this is probably around a 10, or this is probably around an 8, or this might actually be a 12. They might be thinking that in your head just because it's natural human reaction to have that and to make quick snap judgments in 7 seconds. Um, and so because you have that natural reaction, you want to give them big words early and exploit vocabulary early on in your essay more than anywhere else. Obviously, there's a balance of like overdoing it, but at the same time, you want to use it early because they're going to make that first judgment early. So if you can show that, this is probably a lot different than that half-page essay that you just read, which had no big vocabulary words. This is, this beautiful essay with huge vocab words that are used appropriately. That's important. You have to use the vocab words appropriately. You don't just use big words and incorrectly because that could actually look worse. So you have 7 seconds to do that. What's really interesting to me about this is that the College Board has actually spent a lot of time saying, there's less emphasis of obscure vocabulary, and I will call it obscure because a lot of these vocab words are obscure. You wouldn't use them in everyday language, and you probably don't hear me actually saying them as I'm teaching you this course. And so, they've tried to get rid of big vocab on the SAT, and that's true for a lot of the SAT. There's not sentence completions directly testing vocabulary anymore. But it's not true necessarily for the SAT essay. You still need to use big vocabulary words and exploit it in order to score very high on the SAT essay. Um, and vocab is a tangible measure for SAT essay graders to know whether you are a smart student or not. So there's not a lot of tangible measures. But what I mean by tangible measure is something solid that, the SAT essay grader can say, this student is definitely a smart high school student who deserves a high SAT essay grade because they just wrote an awesome essay. And one of the ways they can definitely tell that is by your vocabulary, the way you write and the words that you're using, and if you're using them appropriately, right? Um, so it's a tangible measure that will signal to SAT essay graders, hey, I'm a smart student. You should give me a high SAT essay score. All right, so let's go through some synonyms for common words that you would be using on the SAT essay. So I just picked a few here, and I picked out some synonyms from them that you could use to sound maybe a little bit more scholarly with your writing. Some of the words are still simple, but you're still going to want to use them because you don't want to be saying the same word over and over. For example, like you're going to say the word, or you're going to want to say the word argument quite a bit. You're going to say, the author's argument, this argument, blah, 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 right? So instead of saying argument, you can also say polemic, you can say contention, criticism, stance. You can say any of those words. So let's say that the text that you read is about how the Common Core is bad for teachers. So I'm going to pick on the Common Core here. You can say, the author's criticism instead of saying the author's argument about the Common Core, you can say the author's criticism of the Common Core is excellent, right? So just another word you can throw in, a few others, and there's tons of other words that you could use for argument, but these are just a few. Another word that you're going to commonly use, another noun that you're going to commonly use is society. You're going to want to talk about, you're often going to want to talk about how this affects society. And so some other words for society you could use are civilization or citizenry or democratic public or humankind. In general, you want to talk about society. You can say we once in a while. Generally, I sort of discourage personal pronouns. We'll talk a little more in another strategy, sort of as to why. But you can talk about society or civilization, citizenry. You can talk about all these things. How the Common Core is terrible for American citizenry and the youth, right? Something like that. Another noun you're going to use commonly is going to be article. So you're going to say, the author's article, the author's essay, the author's passage, editorial, critique. So you don't want to just say article, article, article. You can switch it up a little bit and say these other words, and there's other words too, but again, I've just picked a few. Then a lot of times you're going to say the result. Common Core has resulted in very poor outcomes for students, or the repercussions of the Common Core is that teachers have less creativity with what they can teach, like that kind of stuff. So you want to use consequences, repercussions, ramifications, fallout. Those are all other words that you can use instead of result. All right, so that's just a small sample. Let's go over some verb replacements. Persuade. Often the author is going to be persuading your audience, right? They're always going to try to convince your audience, or not your audience. The author is going to try to persuade his audience or her audience. She's going to convince it. She's going to try to sway it, prompt it, influence it. So his argument, his stance on the Common Core, beautifully used facts to prompt the audience to believe that the Common Core was bad for society. So I know that was a terrible sentence that I just made off the top of my head, but the point is you're going to often be using a verb similar to persuade, right? Another verb you're going to be using commonly is create. The author is often going to create different arguments. He's going to create different maybe word choices or imagery throughout the passage. And so instead of create, you can say synthesize or engender, construct or manufacture. You can say all of that. Those all mean create. So, the author synthesized a beautiful argument against the Common Core, right? Support. Oftentimes, the author will need to be backing up his or her claims, right? And so the way that they do that is they support them. They could advocate for them. Maybe a study bolstered. So maybe the study that found that 50% of students do worse on math exams now bolstered the author's idea that the Common Core is bad for society, right? Something like that. Reinforce, fortify, they all mean support. Then you have take advantage, right? So oftentimes the author is going to be taking advantage of or capitalizing on or exploiting, manipulating, employing. Those are all words you can use. For example, the Common Core capitalized on the Harvard name when he had the chance, or the author capitalized on the Harvard name when he had the chance to mention it in his article because it brought credibility to his argument, right? Something like that. Yeah, so there's that. Then you have adjective replacements. So an adjective that you're often going to be using is good, right? So you can say, instead of something is good, you can say something's exceptional, something's commendable, virtuous, idealistic. You can say opponents, or you can say advocates of the Common Core idealistic in the way that they view the education system, right? You're going to sometimes say bad as well. So other words for bad are these words that I just picked out that start with D, are dreadful, deficient, deleterious, detrimental, all of that. The Common Core is detrimental to our children's learning, something like that, right? Or the author pointed that out. Necessary. So oftentimes you're going to say that the author believes that eradication of something is necessary. So like the author might think that eradication of the Common Core is fundamental to our educational system's success, right? So other words for necessary are indispensable, fundamental, imperative, and compulsory. Um, and then clear. So oftentimes you're going to, again, say that, something that the author said was very clear. So instead of saying clear, you can say lucid or coherent, cogent, or explicit. And a lot of these words are actually already built into a lot of the templates that we're going to give you at the end. And, I don't want to ruin the surprise, but everyone that's taken the 2400 course knows we give you guys SAT, essay templates that have a lot of this already built in, but it's important for you to just be aware of using your own big words when you can, switching up the template a little bit, customizing it, and this will help you by knowing some of these items here. So oftentimes you're going to want to say that the author intentionally used a tool to support his argument. So instead of saying intentionally, you can say purposely, willfully, consciously, calculatedly. So you could say that, the author consciously used the data to support his argument against the Common Core. Like he was intentional about it, right? Skillfully, you're going to say, his quote of the superintendent was very skillfully showed his ability to do research or something like that. So skillfully, adroitly, dexterously, adeptly, deftly. You can say all of those. Masterfully, very similar, expertly, convincingly, ingeniously, succinctly. So the author's argument of the Common Core succinctly summed up what's wrong with the education system. Now, see, that's actually more my opinion, so that wouldn't be a great sentence to put in your essay, but you guys get the idea. Carefully. And so, because these are expert authors, they're going to be carefully doing things, right? Every sentence is going to be there for a reason. So you can say that they did it carefully or prudently, judiciously, scrupulously, meticulously. Those are all very good signs that you can use to not only use big vocabulary words, but sound more scholarly overall, right? And so that's how you're going to exploit vocabulary on the SAT essay. All right, fill both pages. Another huge, huge strategy and another tangible measure. So imagine these two. These two are representing 2 pages, and the orange is how much you've written. The orange is how much I want you to write, pretty much 80% to the full both pages that you want to fill up. Versus the average student probably doesn't even get halfway. The reason for that is because they just don't know what to say. They don't know how to form it. They're not used to the topics or prompts, and they don't have templates, of course. But of course, so fill in both pages, huge, huge strategy. Once again, it's a tangible measure. So just like vocabulary is a tangible measure to show SAT essay graders that you're a smart student, so is the length of your essay. So again, there used to be an MIT essay or MIT research study or not used to be, there was an MIT research study done that longer SAT essay grades get higher scores. So I know a lot of you might be thinking, well, that research study had to have been done on the 2400 version of the SAT. Is that going to be true for this new version of the SAT? And the answer is yes. And the reason I say that it's yes is because the scores that the College Board, the sample essays that the College Board has put out for what makes, an essay that gets a 12. And when I say 12, I mean 4 on writing, 4 on reading, 4 on analysis, all 3 of those subscores. What makes that get a 12? You'll see that the essays that get 12s are much, much significantly longer than the ones that are getting, 2s and 3s on the subscores, right? Like the 6s and the 7 essays. So it's really, again, the proof is in the pudding. It's right there. College Board puts it out that the sample essays that get higher scores are going to be the longer ones. And it's just that smarter students typically have more to say. And so it's going to be hard. Your hand is going to hurt. It's not going to be fun. but it's something that you have to practice. The more practice, the more you'll get better at doing this. I mean, we've had thousands of students use this strategy on the 2400 version of the SAT, and they always struggle the first time they have to try to do it, right? Like to try to fill 2 pages fully. Um, but as you practice more, it's going to get easier and easier, and we're going to give you a lot of tools on how to, make sure that you're writing that full 2 pages, because once you do that, you will get a higher score no matter what. So, huge strategy there. Next big strategy is to create a plan. A plan is going to be huge. So before you start writing, you want to know exactly what you're going to write about. So a lot of students, or students who don't take prep expert maybe, they will go ahead and just start writing out of the gate, right? And what happens when you do that is your essay is going to be totally unstructured. You're not going to know what to write next. It's not going to look very good when you put it all together, because you might be going from one topic to the next. So instead, spend a couple minutes brainstorming what you plan to write in your SAT essay. The 3 things that are really important to brainstorm are the 3 tools that the author uses to support his argument. So, the author may use authoritative sources, he may use word choice or diction, and he may use an emotional appeal. And we'll talk a little bit more about the different types of tools that authors use to support their argument later. But so these are some of the tools that the author is going to be using. And so you want to write those out and write which paragraph you're going to be spending you're going to be writing about which tool in which paragraph, and what you're going to write like as evidence for those tools, right? So that should be in your plan. And that's really what you need to write in your plan more than anything else, just so that you've laid out exactly what you're going to talk about and what 3 specific tools. And so we do narrow it down, to 3 specific tools that the author uses to support his or her argument. You can talk about smaller tools within each tool, but overall it's 3 main tools that the author uses to support the argument, and that'll be plenty. And that's what you really want to have mapped out before you start writing the SAT essay, because then it'll be a lot easier to put together your SAT essay when you start writing. All right. 5 is flawless, and this makes sense why this is essay expert strategy number 5. What I mean by this is you want an introduction, a body paragraph 1, body paragraph 2, body paragraph 3, and a conclusion. So again, a lot of high school English teachers would probably cringe if they saw me say that, every essay should be written as a 5-paragraph essay. That's of course not true in the real world, but on the standardized test world of the SAT, or in the standardized test world of the SAT essay, that's totally true. 5 paragraphs works beautifully. In fact, the College Board criticizes a lot of students who don't have intros and conclusions. So it's not okay to sort of just leave out a conclusion because, your 3rd paragraph sums it all up nicely. You need a conclusion, you need an introduction, you need those 3 body paragraphs to basically say the bulk of your message, right? The bulk of all your analysis. And this just works fine. It's very formulaic, but I think it works pretty nicely, and there's nothing wrong with it. Again, so each body paragraph will be one of those tools that we just talked about in your plan, and that's how you're going to structure your essay overall. And so that way you've got a plan and a structure already. You know how to exploit vocabulary, and you know to fill both pages, and you've skipped the directions. So those are the first 5 essay expert strategies that you need to know to ace the SAT essay. And we'll be back in just a little bit to go over the next few.